how did you get into the sort of molecular biology and the biotechnology scene from like school, college, and into university? How did that pathway start?
Yeah, I mean, I think already early on in my life, I mean, I think that becoming an engineer was something that was, I mean, for me, quite obvious. At least when I started to recognize that I probably had the skills to go for education, higher education, that was like the way to go for me. So I was never really in doubt about that. And then I actually started out at DTU, the Technical University of Denmark. That's where I'm hired now also, studying engineering. But actually I started out on electro engineering. So that was where I started. And then I realized maybe that's not the area for me. I mean, so I moved into chemical engineering after a few years. And from there, I mean, then you know that at that time, I mean, microbiology, molecular biology was still in its young age. I mean, engineering cells, etc., was not something that you talked about every day. And I found that quite interesting. Another thing I found quite interesting was actually mathematical modeling. So using computer simulations to try to understand how microorganisms and living systems was working. That was also something I worked with in my studies. So that was a little bit like trying to look for somebody who had that in their research. Was, I mean, what I was looking for when I started to look for my thesis work. So that was actually how I ended up with my first supervisor, Flemming Hansen, and who's actually in my department as an emeritus still. I mean, and I made my thesis with him, and I mean, luckily he got money also to support me for a Ph.D. So I made also my Ph.D. within that field. And that was, I mean, really trying to understand how DNA is, I mean, how does a cell really work? I mean, so this was about how does a cell actually duplicate its DNA and how does it time it? It's actually quite interesting question. I mean, how do we really, I mean, just, I mean, duplicate your DNA when a cell divides? How does it actually understand that? So that was the major question we had in mind when we set out for this PhD, and I mean, ended out having a PhD where we actually came up with a model. I think, I mean, has actually been the current model for quite a while now. There are still studies out there working on this, trying to understand this phenomena. But I think actually we came pretty far with that already at that time. So that was actually my PhD and my thesis and everything, trying to dive into this molecular world where you can really just genetically engineer cells and all these things. It was so super interesting. And at the same time, we were actually also doing this mathematical modeling, trying to prove that this is how it works. So that was about my PhD.